think it's going to be hopefully one full of one that we end with some optimism about the way forward. And I don't think it's all going to be doom and gloom, but I think the most important thing we're going to get out of this panel is some very important knowledge about something we maybe think we know about. Because we hear about religious extremism and religion, the role of religion in Nigeria, so much, we think we know a lot about it. And I'm here to tell you that thanks to these gentlemen, I discovered that I know next to nothing about it. Now, I'm quite intimidated being here. As you see these our three panelists here, they are what you might call intellectual heavyweights. Now, that doesn't mean they're difficult to read, but it means that they know the subject very well and they write in a very accessible manner on the subject, and they have some important things to tell us. Professor Ibrahim is somebody I've known on and off for many years, and I've certainly followed what he does. He's a very erudite academic, and he has some important things and a very interesting take on what we as citizens of Nigeria should be doing about this problem of religious extremism. He's also written some books. He hasn't written one recently, but he's here because of his role in commentating on this particular issue. But I will ask Prof to plug his own books for us too, certainly because I'm plugging Ebenezer Obadare's book, for example, Pentecostal Republic. Highly readable and a very, very enlightening account of just how important the role of religion, particularly Christianity in the form of Pentecostalism, the important role it has played since our independence in Nigeria. Very readable, well-researched, and very erudite. And the Boko Haram doctrine, which again Lola mentioned in introducing Abdul Basit Kasim, is just an incredible piece of work. How long did it take you, by the way? It has so much in it. It is an exploration of Islam, the Quran, the preachers who have been responsible for bringing Boko Haram to the fore, and a whole load of other information which you'll get to hear about as we move forward. So that is a little bit of the background of our guests and a little bit of an idea of what the direction our discussion is going to take. But if I could just start off with Prof, and first of all ask him to fill in my rather weak introduction of his own literary past, and then to help us set the scene by giving us some of the main points that you put forward in a recent article talking about the problems of security in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. Rather than maybe refer to a book, I will just refer all of you to my column 3 weeks ago in Premium Times Daily Trust called 9 Theses on Nigerian religion, where I make the argument that we are mistaken to think the problem in Nigeria is religious extremism. The problem is religion itself. And the reason why religion is the problem, I will start with 2 points in this first round. My first point is that Nigeria has, and a lot of scholars agree with this, the highest level of religiosity in the contemporary world. Now, that doesn't mean Nigerians are religious. It means Nigerians do 3 or 4 things about the religious sector. 1, they pray massively. So the amount of time Nigerians give to prayer is extremely high. And this wasn't how Nigeria was 30, 40 years ago. It's totally new. The second reason is the commitment to religious ritual. Nigerians are convinced that if they engage in religious ritual, it means they are engaged in religion. The third indicator of high religiosity is the amount of resources ordinary Nigerians give to religion. I don't believe there is any country in the world that gives more money to religion than Nigerians do. And the fourth and final indicator of high religiosity is that Nigerians believe religion is an investment. Because they give time and money, they must be rewarded because of time and money. So this is the religiosity. My second point in this round is that Nigeria is the most irreligious society in the world. That is, Nigerians don't believe in God. That's the basic fact. They don't believe in their religion. And sociologically, it's very easy to prove it. Look at what the religious values are. High morality. Nigerians have zero morality. No corruption, religion tells us. Nigerians are the most corrupt in society. Both Christianity and Islam enjoins its members to follow peace and show love. We don't follow peace, we promote violence, and we show hatred, not love. So when you go through all the values enunciated by Christianity and Islam, Nigerians have absolutely no correspondence in their daily lives with these values. It is therefore important for Nigerians to know. Yes, when those surveys were done, including by the Pew Foundation, it was discovered Nigeria has more people believing in God than any country in the world. But when you rate them, and as a social scientist, against the values enunciated by these religions, Nigerians score the least. Isn't it sad that all of us don't believe in God?
Very, very interesting. And I think no matter how religious members of the audience are, I don't think there's much you can disagree with what has just been said. Now, and I have to say, I agree with that, particularly that analysis that it's not just the extremism, but religion itself causes a serious problem. And then to balance the other side of that coin in terms of balancing the Islamic with the Christian religion, perhaps you could address that aspect with regard to the angle you're coming from.
I was going to start praying. So I agree with Professor Ibrahim that it is not religious extremism as such that should command our attention, but religiosity or the religious imagination, especially the Nigerian iteration that has steadily taken possession of the collective mind over the past quarter of a century or so. I want to suggest that religious extremism, for all its ruinations and dangers, remains nonetheless, and I think I'm agreeing with him here, it's a low-hanging fruit. Much more insidious, more destructive of the civic spirit, and therefore more ramifying in its implications, I propose, is the ideological causing of religious extremism, religiosity, or the religious imagination. So what do I mean by this? What lends the religious imagination such a terrible aspect that I favor giving it priority over religious extremism? In order to answer this question successfully, and I think context is important for our discussion, We must first name the religious sensibility that has constituted more or less the defining spirit of the Nigerian Fourth Republic since its inception in 1999. That presiding spirit is Pentecostalism, a Christian form so all-engulfing and so powerful that one sees its imprint in nearly every aspect of our social life, from politics, through sport, to the economy, entertainment, the arts, the media, education, civil society, and to infer from some troubling evidence which emerged recently from its uppermost echelons, even the military. For those who may have missed it, I'm referring here to the spiritual warfare seminar on the theme, Counterinsurgency and Violence Extremism in Nigeria Through Spiritual Warfare, organized by the Nigerian Army on September 30, 2019. Now, having named this sensibility, and in light of my overall argument that Pentecostalism tends to a fundamental corrosion of social felicity in Nigeria, I want to touch upon its impact, and for the sake of time, I'm going to limit myself to 5 interrelated elements. This is short. First, Nigerian Pentecostalism, imbued with a deeply anti-intellectual impulse, is hostile towards reason. This has various consequences, all uniformly injurious. For one thing, hostility towards reason makes clear public deliberation impossible, as debate tends to be stymied or corrupted by insinuations of extra-human agency. Whether manifested as a hankering after miracles or a quest for spiritual intelligence, there can be no doubt as to the grievous social harm that the perversion of or hostility towards reason can give occasion to. Second, and this is a corollary of the first point, weakening of public debate prepares the soil for civic atrophy, which in turn increases the possibility of a hijack of the public sphere by illiberal or outright reactionary forces. Therefore, the Pentecostal sensibility constitutes an indirect attack, but an attack nonetheless on one of the constitutive elements of a healthy democracy, namely a robust public sphere of critical conversation. Third, Pentecostal insistence on a world of ubiquitous spirits, a world in which human agency is either completely absent or, when present, exists in sufferance to the untold machinations of invisible evil spirits, works to undercut the very idea of democratic accountability. If agency cannot be assigned because sundry familiar spirits and roving spirits are the ones calling the shots, then there is no agential responsibility. And not surprisingly, politicians and office holders are attracted to this worldview because it excuses and writes off their impunities. Other aspects of this process of democratic enchantment are discussed in detail in my book. Fourth, Pentecostalism's ethical disposition, and this is consistent with what Professor Ibrahim said earlier. Pentecostalism's ethical disposition is dubious at best and at worst positively invidious. When it is not lending dubious theological justification to ill-gotten wealth through its constant advertisement of wealth as something that happens accidentally or miraculously, it is dismissing delayed gratification, personal industry, investment, diligent accumulation, and frugality, all elements of the Calvinist ethic. Either way, it offers no reliable platform on which public morality may be anchored. Fifth and finally, whether we are talking about religious extremism or mere religiosity, as I've postulated, it is important to always focus our attention on power. For not only is it impossible to discuss religion in the absence of power, it is in fact fruitless. Pentecostalism commingles with power in at least 2 ways. First, Pentecostal delegitimization of human agency makes political mesmerism possible. Second, and as we have seen over the course of the Fourth Republic in Nigeria, the alliance of the political class and the theocratic class empowers both to the detriment of the rest of society. None of what I've just said is to be taken as an indication that religious extremism is not a problem. It is, and a serious one at that. Now, am I suggesting that Pentecostalism alone is to be blamed for all the social evils that haunt Nigeria? I make no such claim. My reservation is that because religious extremism is such an obvious problem, So obvious that even extremists disavow extremism. It is easy to overlook a religious mentality that is no less damaging for the body politic, not just immediately, but also in the long run. Thank you.
So I think you're beginning to see, when I said I'm intimidated here by the intellects I'm seated beside, I think you can see what I mean. But also I hope that those two salvos that have been fired by Professor Ibrahim and Mr. Ebenezer, I hope they also intimidate in a positive way those who are overfilled with religiosity. And the reason I say that is that even from what has just been said, pushing some of the responsibility back towards religion in general, we can see, and I want to come to you on this point, that we can begin to see how religion itself, even while disavowing extremism, actually makes it possible. And you've written this one wonderful and very in-depth book on Boko Haram, and that is one, what I would call a symptom of the religiosity we have. But I would love you to now bring that angle onto this conversation about how religiosity is empowering extremism.
Thank you so much for this platform to speak on this very vital and important topic. I would love to come from two different angles on this subject. The first angle, I would say that from history, from different historical books, we've seen that religion actually plays a twin role. Religion can actually be used for negativity and to cause destruction, or it can actually be used for positivity. So I think the major question we should really engage with is, how can religion become a positive force in our society rather than being a negative force for which it is at the moment? Now, in my dissertation research, I've actually been going to different archives and looking at different manuscripts, scholarship that has actually been written in northern Nigeria, which is my major focus of research, from the 17th century up to the 21st century. Now, what I discovered from this archival materials, I actually saw the way that religion and scholars, religious scholars, the way they actually promote humanistic knowledge, scientific knowledge, as well as social scientific knowledge. I saw Muslim scholars, like religious scholars from northern Nigeria, writing manuscripts on cartography, on chemistry, writing manuscripts on astronomy, writing manuscripts on arithmetic, writing manuscripts on agriculture, on history, on politics, on philosophy. So I asked myself, if this is the genealogy of scholarship that has developed in northern Nigeria, which is my primary focus of research, then what happened? How did we get to this point where religion is now being used for negativity rather than for positivity? Because the works I was actually analyzing, the scholars who wrote those works, they were like the Aristotle and the Plato of their time. They were actually polymath. These are not something that is actually made up. They are all evidence. The scripts are there. So I asked myself, if scholars in the past can actually use religion to promote this scholarly venture, then why today is religion not used for the same purpose? Now, to answer this question of mine, which is one of the crucial questions I'm asking in my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, I embarked on a field research to Yobe State. I just came back from Yobe State 4 days ago. In Yobe State, now what most people don't know, although Boko Haram insurgency have actually affected Borno State, and Borno State is always on the spotlight, but the majority of the leaders of Boko Haram are originally from Yobe State and not Borno State. They actually migrated to Borno State, but their origin is actually from Yobe State. So I went to 11 local governments that have been badly affected by Boko Haram out of the 17 local governments. And when I went to those local governments, I was basically trying to trace the intellectual genealogy of the actors of Boko Haram. I was interested in knowing, what did they study? Which environment are they coming from? Who were their scholars? Who taught them? What books did they read for them to give such interpretation of religion that has become so devastating to the entire society? So this was actually the question I was actually interested in. So I won't want us to focus so much on the negativity of religion, because there's a danger. The danger is it can actually foster phobia for religion. Religion is actually an important force in our life, whether we actually like to admit it or not. Religion is important. But then the question then would be, just today we heard in an announcement, I don't know how true the announcement is, I saw it on social media, that Pastor Oyedepo actually donated 650 million naira to build roads. I don't know, I've not verified the authenticity of that information, but immediately I saw that news, I said, religion can actually contribute public good, because the government itself is actually failing, and in the failure of religion, in the failure of the government, religion and religious institution can actually come in and play a vital role. We've seen the rise of religiously owned higher educational system in Nigeria. And these institutions, from Covenant to Landmark to Fountain University, to most of these universities, we can see how, to Babcock, they are actually playing that vital role that our public education has actually failed. So there's so many positivity in religion. But for us to achieve that positivity, we need to have this conversation. And we need to ask ourselves, why should we continue to use religion for negativity? How can we use religion for positivity? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we can use that as a takeoff point, because it actually speaks to what Prof. Ibrahim has written about recently in the Premium Times about the state of insecurity in Nigeria, but more importantly about what we as citizens can do. You mentioned about how government appears to have failed, and of course when there's a vacuum, something has to fill it. And in some cases it is appropriate for citizens to first of all appreciate the responsibility and the potential power that they have, and secondly to exercise it. So Prof, you had some interesting ideas on what we should do as citizens in terms of addressing, talking about the problems of insecurity now, especially in the north.
You know, Paul, she invited us to talk about religious extremism, and we're avoiding it. We're talking about religion. The role of citizen, I have 9 points. The role of citizen is number 8. So I will want to make 3 points, and maybe in the last round,
please do.
I'll come to the role of citizen. I just want to take us back to 1980, which is more or less when Pentecostalism really took off in Nigeria. And I've been following Pentecostalism since then. So my hypothesis was that these American Pentecostal churches were pumping so much money, and because of American money, Pentecostalism was growing in Nigeria. So I went to my teacher on sociology of religion, Professor Matthews Zojo, and said, Matthews, what do you think of my hypothesis? He said, it's absolute nonsense I was talking about. 1980 is an important year in this country because that was when formally the Nigerian state stopped taxing citizens. You remember Kano and Kaduna started it, and by the end of that year, no general tax was being paid in Nigeria. But at that same time, the Pentecostalists found out they could substitute for the state, and they imposed a 10% tax on all their members. And, shock, their members actually paid the 10% tax of all their income each year. What does that mean? It means the big entry of Pentecostalism into the Nigerian religious space happened along the path of capital accumulation. That this is a source through which vast amounts of resources could be extracted by members of that religious organization on the basis of a return that you will give those members. And those returns are not spiritual. They are material returns. The Pentecostal church offers its members two things: good health and wealth. These are material issues. They have nothing to do with God. So that's the offer, that's the promise. And one of the things the sociologists of Pentecostalism have found out is that there's this constant migration. Because when you join a church, you do your part, you pay 10% of your income, and they fail to do their part, make you healthy and wealthy, then you move to the next one. So Nigerians have a very dynamic relationship with religion. The fourth point I want to make, and this is very important, and it has to do about what is the nature of the religious arena in Nigeria. It is an arena where access is totally open. By open, it means the rules of entry were changed. In Islam, to be considered a religious cleric, you need to go through a long period of religious training, which you start as a kid, and it's only after 15, 20, 25 years that you graduate to the rank of a religious teacher. In Orthodox churches, there is a long training period. You actually go to theology school. You do 3 to 5 years in theology school. You learn the religious sciences such as eschatology. And by the end of that process, you become a priest. The new religions completely change that. You do 6 months Bible study in a Pentecostal church, you are declared to be a priest. The focus, however, on popular religion shouldn't be just on Pentecostalism. People don't realize that popular religion in Islam has almost the same sociological characteristics as popular religion in Christianity. By popular religion in Islam, I mean Wahhabism, or more specifically, Salafism. In Nigeria, we've had one of the most dramatic periods of religious change that has happened in the contemporary world. In just over a generation, 30 to 35% of Nigerians left the religion of their parents. It hasn't happened anywhere else in world history where there's this massive conversion. So in Christianity, the new generation left the Catholic Church, the Anglican Communion, Methodist, etc., and joined Pentecostal churches. In Islam, exactly the same thing happened. We have two basic religious traditions in Nigeria, both of which are Sufi traditions. One is the Tijaniya Brotherhood, the other is the Qadiriya Brotherhood. Again, 30 to 35% of Muslims left the religion of their parents and joined the new Wahhabi / Salafi sects. Now, the close similarity of these two new religious movements is that both of them emphasize individualism. Salvation, both of them tell you, is not based on your family or your commitment or your community. It is purely an individual thing. And they tell you one thing, immediately you join. If your parents are not there with you, they give you the injunction. Those people are going to hell. Don't talk religion with them. They are not saved. You are saved. Cut off from them. We will guide you. We will give you religious knowledge. We will spell out for you the pathway to salvation. So both Pentecostalism and Wahhabism / Salafism cut social links between adherents and their families and commitments, and that was what opened them up to new influences, including, but not specific to, extremism.
Thank you, Prof. Very, very true. I think you can see why when I said I'm intimidated here, you can see why. I mean, you ask a question, even Prof has redefined the question for us, but we can see that it is so closely related that if we are talking about extremism, we cannot address it without addressing the wider question of religiosity. Mr. Abadari, if you could also comment on, it was very interesting, that point of the parallels between Pentecostalism and the Salafi and Wahhabi in Islam.
Yeah, it's actually, it goes to the core of some of the things I discuss in my book about what I call the emergence of charismatic Islam, especially in Yoruba land, where Muslims are trying to, they're basically buying into the repertoires and conventional strategies of Pentecostals, because Pentecostals, have basically stolen the march on, the other dominant religion, in Nigeria. So that's taken. But I wanted to come back to the point about, health and wealth, because I think it's very important, and I think it's correct that that's what Nigerians want, which is what human beings everywhere want. But I want to also connect that to what you said about Bishop Oyedepo, because I think it's also important to be very clear about these things. After Pentecostalism has been the dominant form of Christianity in Nigeria now for at least a quarter of a century, I think it's about time we ask ourselves, so where is the health? If anybody knows where the health is, I want them to tell me. Where's the wealth? I know where the wealth is. It's with the 1%, the Pentecostal 1%. I mean, there's a reason why Oyedepo is able to, donate, to say, okay, I'm going to do a project of 650 million naira. The question to ask is, where is that money coming from? Yeah, from the members. I mean, Pentecostalism is basically playing with house money. I crave the indulgence of people in the audience. There's a Yoruba proverb that I think captures this. Babalawo to she ogun awari fun ayan, òun ló ṣe tí arinako fadiye. It's not very easy to translate, but basically it's saying Pentecostalism is playing, plays with house money. It's not just the fact that Oyedepo wants, to commit himself to a project that I find interesting, is the fact that he's a member of a theocratic class that basically has its fingers in every pie, of Nigerian social life. Forget about Oyedepo. Tunde Bakari was in Canada late last year, and he was talking to a Nigerian group in the diaspora, and he released an information which I thought, and I've actually written about this, and he said they donated 350 million naira to Governor El-Rufai, their friends, when Governor El-Rufai was running to be, governor of Kaduna State. And I thought, that's a religious leader giving a loan to, a politician, to run for office. But it's not just that information is interesting. It's also important that we think about the implications of those things. So Tunde Bakare has emerged as one of the most vocal opponents of, the way things are in Nigeria last 20 years or so. But he's very strategic about it. He was one of the people who led people to the street, with Save Nigeria group. But remember, he's been very quiet under the Buhari regime. Why? Because he ran as vice presidential candidate, with Buhari. They are literally in bed. So it's important to think about religious leaders, especially Pentecostal pastors, not just as people who are do-gooders, but as theocratic agents with very interesting political commitments and political interests. And I want to say that because it's interesting to think about. I sympathize with you. So in my earlier remarks, I said that the specific iteration of religiosity in Nigeria. So I'm basically accommodating your point. And part of why I'm so disenchanted with Pentecostalism is what I consider to be its attack on the Calvinist ethic. That's a form of religion. But there's a spirit of incredulity in the country, that we need to talk about. And because you are talking about solutions, we can't talk about those solutions. Capital is one thing, but the university system, the way in which we educate, members of the next generation, we no longer have a system of higher education. Nigerian universities are dead. Pentecostalism is one of the chief contributors to that spirit of incredulity. And until we begin to look at it pointedly, we are not going to come near a solution. Thank you.
Just a word on Calvinism.
Yeah. Just quickly, Prof, because I want to give the audience time for questions.
It's Ibrahim Tahir, who studied the merchant class in Kano in the 70s and 80s and did his PhD in Cambridge University, focused his work on how Muslim merchants in Kano are completely in line with the analysis Obadari has done of Calvinism, and you can simply change the word Muslim to Christian, and it's all the theory of Calvinism. I just thought I'll add that to your point.
Good point, sir. I'm sure you'd want to throw one or two things in there. When you made that point, if you would also address, because while you're here, and I'm sure the audience would be interested, that we do have some misconceptions about, I'm moving back to extremism now, about Boko Haram and what they stand for. And I wouldn't like us to leave this place without us picking your brains on that. But so please also address the issue I'm sure is burning you as well.
Yes, thank you. I just have two points of departure. The first point of departure, I really appreciate the fact that Professor Obadari actually brought the issue of religious leaders. And personally myself, I actually believe that religious followers should be empowered to question religious leaders. That act of subserviency, of being totally subservient to religious leaders, I think is actually dangerous. And I'll give an example. From 2000 to 2019, religious leaders, especially in northern Nigeria, which is my area study, they've embarked upon radical change in their positions. And those radical change in their position is usually influenced by two factors. Number one, their close proximity to political power. So if, for example, a cleric has some benefit to gain from a certain government, that cleric will be mute. if it doesn't have anything to gain from the government, then it become a vocal critique and a dissident. So closer proximity to political power actually is one of the game that religious leaders play with their followers. And followers, they actually see this change. They see this change, but they actually don't ask questions because they've been taught to be subservient. And then the second issue is the sources of funding for religious proselytism in Nigeria. There are majorly two sources of funding for religious proselytism. Now you have to understand, any idea you see in the mainstream is actually funded. There's no idea that actually make it to the mainstream without it being funded. Now, this funding usually comes from two sources. The first source is either external funding, just like what Professor Jibril Ibrahim spoke about, the American Pentecostal evangelical churches that actually are important. In the case of Islam, it was money coming from the Gulf country. The second source of funding is local merchants. Now, local businessmen who actually believe in a certain religious cause, and then they fund those causes. Now, that funding, what it does to religious leaders, it actually makes their position to be subservient to the interest of the funders. So if, for example, the funders decide that today we don't want to focus on girl child education, the cleric will also change stance as well. It will change his stance. And I think it's very, very important for for followers to actually ask questions. Why is this position allowed in year 2000 and why is it not allowed in 2019? What changed? Is it the interest of the funders? Is it because they're no longer having closer proximity to power? Just a quick example. Most of the religious cleric during the era of Goodluck Jonathan in northern Nigeria, they were vocal critique of the government. They were vocal critique. Some of them even come to the pulpit and they were crying. They were weeping about some of the anomalies in Jonathan's government. When President Buhari came into power, they all adopted reticence. They all became silent. And even when their followers tell them, why are you now silent? Because they have closer proximity to political power. And lastly, on the issue of Boko Haram, there's so many conspiratorial thoughts out there about Boko Haram. And for me, I'm always very careful that anything I say on the subject is actually based on facts, something I can defend. That was the purpose of the Boko Haram reader. But another important point of writing the reader is, most times when we see the actions of Boko Haram, the bombing, the anomalies, the atrocity they've perpetrated, most times people find it hard to understand, why are they doing this kind of action? Did their religion actually justify this action? People want to know. So for people who do not understand the major languages that Boko Haram are actually using for their proselytism, which is Hausa language, Arabic language, as well as Kanuri language, that was the purpose of the reader, so that people can then sit and then understand that this is the reason Boko Haram actually are doing their action, so that you can understand them from their own point of view. You can understand why they ate Western education, for example, why they engage in slavery, why they did so that your understanding of the group is actually going to come from an informed position rather than from conspiratorial thoughts that have been peddling the religious public sphere in the last decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think that set the scene very nicely for an interactive part of the session. I'd like to underscore this part by a quick protective note about Ake. The conclusion or the summary of what has been said here mostly about religion is not an attack on religion, it's an attack on how we are practicing it. It's an attack on religiosity without actual religion. I hope I can be deemed correct in that. So I don't want to see any headlines in the papers yesterday saying religion came under attack at Ake Festival, just so that we can come back next year in safety.
Are you protecting your wife?
Now, I'm sure there are plenty of questions and comments from the audience, and we have a bit of time for that, so let's move straight into that. So I will go from the front to the back. Let me pick you now. 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3. If we take those 3 questions, then I'll come back. Sorry, which one of you did I pick? You. Okay, so I will come back. We'll start with you. Okay, so those 3 for the first 3 questions. We'll take the 3 questions. Please introduce yourself and indicate who the question is directed to, and then we'll do the 3 together, and then we'll come back and take some more.
All right. Hello, my name is Chijoke. I guess my question is really open to all members of the panel. And I really just want to get your perspective on how significant it is that the Nigerian state seems to have completely ignored the Section 10 of the Constitution that states clearly that no state nor the federal government shall adopt a religion. And as well, on the subject of church taxes, I just want to ask, has the government done enough? That is, if state and religious institutions must now be co-collaborators in national development, has the government done enough to ensure that the religious institutions are living up to the responsibility that is fitting of their revenue? And as well, finally, I want to ask how important a role religious institutions have to play in, since health is one of their selling points. Speaking of mental health specifically, a lot of people have come out with stories of how they go to seek help from psychologists, and then they end up being referred to churches or being prayed for, discriminated against. And how close is the relationship between dogmatism and religious extremism? Thank you.
Thank you. He did all the questions at once. But there's a second, we'll take the second person there.
My name is Damnola Marcos. A lot of the conversation revolved around the problem of religiosity, but I wanted to ask, what is the solution? Because we can see that the problem is multi-layered and is very ingrained, particularly when you want to discuss religion with any average person in Nigeria. It's almost a no-go topic. So how do we move from something that is so protected and is so part of our culture? How do we move from that conversation of here's the problem to here's the solution?
Okay, thank you. And whoever I selected, who did I select at the back? I think it was the lady there. Yeah.
Okay, I have a very simple, pretty straightforward question. Who is in the right position to check religion and religious leaders? Because in Nigeria, it seems that everything we have tried has failed. The government has failed. Religious organizations and allegiances, they have all failed. We have the Christian Association of Nigeria. I think it's just like, I don't know what they're doing and how they have come far in treating these issues. And we have a very serious crisis in Nigeria right now, because religion is something that grows and it finds its footprints where there is too much despair or hopelessness. For example, in Nigeria, we already have 91 million people living in poverty. And we have one of the highest, if not the highest, rate of out-of-school children in the world. We have very high rates of infant and maternal mortality. Our health crisis is going deeper and deeper. And politically, we're not really strong in any way. So all these things are only going to foster religious extremism. They're only going to foster people looking for hope where they cannot find it. Because if you cannot find hope in your hospitals, you cannot find hope in the government, you cannot find hope in schools, you look for something that's not material, probably, which always is religion. So what are we doing to check religion on the side of, he has talked about the taxes, he has talked about the law that is being not really being put into place, but who exactly is in the position? Because that is question I've tried to ask for a long time, and it seems that the way Nigeria is built right now, nothing can actually be done. So
Well,
who is in the right position
We'll
to
see
check
if we can
religion?
get an answer. Thank you very much for that. Okay, I think we'll go, okay, let me start from here. We'll just go in order and you pick whichever question you like. Please, let's keep it brief so we can have plenty of
Okay, I'll just respond to question 1. It's very important people know how Section 10 came about. Section 10 says, there shall be no state religion for Nigeria. When the 1979 Constitution was being debated, 2 things happened. The Iranian Revolution had occurred, and the Muslim community in Nigeria demanded for Sharia courts from the area court to the Supreme Court. So they did all these memos to the Constituent Assembly making that demand. And it became the official position of the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs. The Christian Association of Nigeria responded with a counter memo saying Nigeria has always been a secular state, and the proposition of the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs will remove Nigeria from the secular terrain to a religious terrain. It became very hot. Obasanjo, as a brilliant military officer, said, I'll lock you people up in the Constituent Assembly, find a compromise. He did that. Everybody stuck to his position. All the Christians voted one way. All the Muslims voted the other way. Obasanjo was brilliant. He gave the solution. Oh yeah, have Sharia up to the Supreme Court, but ensure that no specific religion will be adopted as a religion. Assumption being neither at the federal level nor at the state level. So Obasanjo's compromise was based on the blockage that had arrived. Now the problem thereafter was, what's the interpretation of Section 10? Up till today, when you read releases by Khan, they tell you Nigeria is a secular state. Although, of course, that word secular appears nowhere in the Nigerian constitution. But Christians will still tell you Nigeria is a secular state. At the same time, the claim that Nigeria is an Islamic state because of the acceptance of Islamic courts has absolutely no justification, because in Nigeria's legal system, Sharia is defined as a customary jurisdiction, and all states in this country have the right to set up customary courts, and the interpretation of the Supreme Court